Welcome to Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer, a show to make your survivorship an easier journey by providing information and advocating for you. A show to help practitioners up their game and their level of performance. This is the Croc Podcast. Here is your host, Dr. E, and alongside him to share some hope and inspiration from the Have Faith, Let It Begin podcast, co-host Angel Santana.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Tom Iannelli, the founder and director of Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer. I am so pleased and humbled that you decided to join us today for today's podcast. I believe it will give you inspiration, and I believe it will give you information that will help you in your survivorship. Today, we're going to be talking about how much impact your caregivers can have on you, on our survivors, during our initial consultation. Joining me, Angel Santana. How are you, my friend? It's been a few weeks.
It has, and I just want to welcome everybody back. I've been doing good, like we talked about offline, struggles, but hey, we rise to the occasion just like the Croc Nation does. So I want to officially welcome them back to another week and another inspiring episode of the Croc Podcast, Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer. We are so grateful to have you with us as we continue this movement of hope, strength, and survivorship. Do not forget, though, to like, share, and subscribe to the Croc Podcast. It's on your favorite platform, and help us spread the message far and wide so that you can also visit us online at crocvip.com. So this way you can connect with us, learn from us, send an email together. We will just not only become this inspiring podcast, because we are not only a podcast, we're a movement. I'm excited for today. I know Dr. E's ready. Let's go, man. I'm ready because it sounds like to me that we have a safe harbor ahead of us.
Yeah, that's a true story, Angel. And I have to tell you, this was not an easy podcast. I mean, usually we have 2 weeks in between podcasts for me to kind of think about a subject that's important for us to share and then prepare for it. But as the last podcast went off and that week went by and then this new week started before this podcast, I was coming up with blanks. I didn't have any really great ideas. And we have a bunch of podcasts coming up that are what I call on the launch pad, almost ripe to be picked. Many of them, thankfully, offered by our board member, Nick Lanza, who's just such a blessing to have with us, and who takes, advocating for the survivor so seriously. And Nick, we're going to get to him, I promise. But we just weren't ready yet. So I had to come up with something. And then as the week went on, I had two moments in the clinic that sort of inspired today's podcast. So in one instance, it was in both instances, a patient, a survivor, and their family came into our clinic, and they were scared. All of them were scared out of their mind. They were absolutely in complete distress. They were terrified, and by the end of at the end of the consultation, they left smiling. They left laughing. They were buoyed by the consultation, and they felt they had a direction, and they felt that they had this. They felt that they were now had a way to manage the situation. And one of the things that the patient and their family said to me was how thankful they were of how I made such a great I had such a great influence, that I made such a great change with them just in the consultation process. And then another instance, very similarly, the nursing staff pulled me aside and told me the same thing. They just said it was remarkable what a difference that the consultation made. And an image came to my mind. It was the image of a ship. Like I think of an old ship with the old-fashioned sails getting stuck in a big squall in this terrible weather and floundering in this storm, and the sailors being lost and cold and wet and scared, convinced that they were going to die. And then they would see in the distance this dim light coming from the lighthouse on the coast, beaconing them to safety. And I thought to myself, Angel, that these ships are very much like our survivors. immediately after, but just before, right after their diagnosis, but right before they have their first consultation and the first time they meet their oncology team. And I felt that we can be that safe harbor if we seize the opportunity. So when we talk about safe harbor, we talk about, basically any port in a storm, right? So it reminded me of that. And I felt that, again, our survivors reminded me of these ships, right? And we can be that safe harbor if we seize that opportunity. And I don't want to make sure that I set the stage for this correctly. So what I call caveat emptor, which means, beware. This is sort of our warning or our disclaimer, is that you can never lie to a patient in order to get them to where these patients got, where they went from despair to, feeling secure. You could never hold back concerning information, and you can never create false hope. You have to be able to create that change no matter if the patient has a curable condition or an incurable condition. So these ships that are looking for that safe harbor, any port in a storm, as they say, this safe harbor in a storm doesn't mean avoiding danger. It doesn't mean, avoiding difficulty or pain. It means instead developing the strength, the steadiness, and the emotional mastery to withstand the storm. So I think that's where I think the care team, the oncology team, can make an impact during the consultation process. And I know what our listeners are probably thinking. How the heck are we supposed to make a patient laugh, smile, and feel great after you've just told them that they might have an incurable cancer? And my answer is very simple. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And it's the old adage that we all know. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes and go through my process or my method or my formula, which more often than not does achieve what we want to achieve. And again, providing that safe harbor. So I have what's called the consultation checklist. So the most important, and we've done, podcasts on each of these topics, each of this checklist. But the first is to create a rapport with your patient. This is where it all starts. So when you walk in, again, as a trained physician or a trained caregiver, you need to read the room. So you need to feel that terror. You have to feel that fear. You have to feel that, despair in these patients. And you have to be able to then take that and figure out how to turn it around. You have to make eye contact, right? You can't be looking at your computer. You have to be looking at the patient. And you have to really, you can't think that you're being empathetic. You have to be empathetic, because a patient can tell the difference when you're faking it and when you're not faking it. You literally have to put yourself in the place of that survivor. And number two is that you just slowly, after you get to know a little bit about them and the family, introduce yourself and they introduce themselves to you. You get to know something about them that you wouldn't read in the medical chart, right? So I had a patient, a couple of weeks ago that was a Vietnam veteran who was a decorated hero who did all sorts of stuff and, avoided death by like a millimeter. And I've talked to people who have met the Pope and who have met presidents, and just really wonderful stories. And you get to know a couple of things about the patients. And this creates and establishes that rapport. And once you do that, you could set the stage. So you start segueing into just giving general oncology information. What is oncology? What is cancer? And just general information for a few minutes. And then you get specific about their tumor site. And when you're talking about the tumor site, especially with cancers, that might be, we did a cancer episode on HPV related tumors of the GI tract. And I think that was our last podcast. We've talked about lung cancer, head and neck cancer. So it's really important that you don't make the patients feel guilty that they deserve their cancer, either whether they were smokers or whatever it is that their habits were. You have to make sure that that there's no guilt, that they forgive themselves, So that's a really big component of trying to make them feel better about themselves and feel confident. And then you start talking a little bit about the stage and the prognosis. There's a famous expression, it's just a suggestion, right? Like, so telling patients accurate information is just a suggestion. It really shouldn't be a suggestion. It should be what we do. It should be what we do with each patient. We should talk about what their stage is and their prognosis, and then we should be able to, frame it appropriately. So if a patient has a stage 4, I've seen many stage 4 patients who have been cured, especially with head and neck cancer, et cetera, et cetera. And I've seen also, sadly, some stage 1 cancers that became incurable. So you just have to frame it. You have to read your room. You have to go through all treatment options, and you have to do it in an unbiased way. I have this pet peeve that when I see a prostate cancer patient, patients will see a surgeon, and the surgeons will say, well, you don't want to do radiation, because if you do radiation, then you can never have surgery. And that's such a falsehood. And I say to the patients, well, you can have surgery, and I think that's a great option for you, but just don't do it for that reason, because that's just not, that's your doctor trying to sell you on something. That's not really the truth. So if you wanted radiation and you were talked out of it because of a falsehood, a false statement, that's one thing. But if surgery is what you want, then that's absolutely fine, as long as it's the right thing to do. No doctor should have a problem with that. We're not car salesmen. We're doctors, we're educators. That's what our job is. It's not to try to sell somebody or try to capture somebody, into your service. And when patients will feel this, Angel, they'll feel that you're not trying, like that they're just not a number, that they're just not, part of a cookie cutter process. They'll when they see that you don't have any hidden agenda, or you're not really there for you, you're there for them. That also sets the stage where they start feeling confident and comfortable. And then the other thing, getting to these treatment options, really, you have to really work, because there is an inherent bias no matter what. And I tell the patients that. I say, guys, I'm a radiation oncologist. I'm going to be as unbiased as I possibly can, but I'm sure there's going to be some bias that bleeds into this consult. And when you say that, they accept that, so they understand. Sadly, doctors don't talk about side effects, in great detail. And sometimes when they do it sort of robotically. Like, a surgeon, you could die, you could hemorrhage, you can have a stroke, you can have this, you can have that. And it's like, it's almost like watching one of those TV commercials where you have this couple, that are walking hand in hand, and they take in this great drug that's taking their eczema away, but it could kill you and kill your liver and kill your kidneys and kill your eyes and kill your ears. You have to do it in a way that's fair. I mean, okay, yes, there could be a serious complication, but what are the percentages that there will be this maybe 4 out of 100 or whatever the number is. So you have to make sure that, you frame it that way. And then you also have to talk about, data and your personal experience. So you have to go through the numbers with the patients, go through the studies and go through the literature. And then you also have to offer the patient a second opinion and to see if there's any clinical trials that are available. And, answer questions, and then you have to achieve a mechanism of how you are accessible to the patient and their family. So with me, it's a cell phone number. I don't, wouldn't judge anybody who doesn't do that. I think it's a great way to get in touch with a doctor quickly and without having to go through all the trouble of going through operators and answering services and things like that. But you have to decide. And it's so sad because, one of the things that makes patients feel really uncomfortable and really afraid is that once they leave you and they try to get in touch with you and they can't, they almost feel lost. They almost feel that they've been abandoned, so this is another key critical situation that has to be achieved, during the consultation process. And then you want to do Ed Koch. I don't know if you remember Ed Koch. He was the mayor of New York. He used to say, hey, how am I doing? So what I would say, how did you like the consultation? Did I hit everything you needed me to hit? Did you understand everything I said? Did you want me to repeat anything? Did you feel that this consultation was a good experience for you? And you'd be surprised how people really pick up on that and appreciate that. And then you have to give them some space. You can't be like, when you go to a car dealership and they want to sell you a car and they'll say, I'll give you this price if you sign and buy the car right now. No, you have to give them space. You have to give them time. You have to give them time to think about it, to talk to their family, to pray about it. And during this space, by the way, it's really good for the physician as well, because it gives us time then to collaborate with our colleagues, to talk to their other doctors, and also present them to our tumor board. So, you get what's called the consensus opinion on how to proceed rather than just one person's view on things. And, this is called the shared decision-making process. And this is all part, it's not all completed by the first consultation, but it's part of that first consultation. And then we put it all together. You have this beautiful picture, this beautiful consult, and now we have to frame it. We have to put it in the right frame. And we put everything in perspective, whether it's a stage 1 curable cancer, stage 1 incurable cancer, but a treatable cancer. It's the story that we tell all the time about the 50-year-old heart attack victim and the 50-year-old breast cancer patient who get admitted to the hospital the same day and they get discharged from the hospital the same day. One of them is going to go out for ice cream and for a Big Mac, and the other one is going to be going to the graveyard to pick out a plot. And, you think it would be the heart guy would be going to the cemetery to plan his final resting place, and it would be the breast cancer patient that would be going for ice cream. But it's the exact opposite, because once you hear the word cancer, you have to really, during the consultation, demystify and disempower that word cancer. And there are a couple of special circumstances that, you need to kind of be aware of and figure out how to manage in order to achieve that safe harbor during the consultation. One is the quiet patient, the one that doesn't give you any feedback, the one that's not like shaking their head or laughing at your jokes or interacting and, giving you information, even personal information, the ones that kind of stay real stone-faced. And that's okay. You have to just be able to accept that and just continue. If you just stay the course and go through your checklist, even if the patient is quiet and not playing their hand, like they're perfect poker players. They're not telling you whether they like what you're saying or don't like what you're saying, but just be you, continue with whatever your style is as a healer. And then the second group of patients is the difficult patients, right? So these are the patients that no matter what we do, we could stand on our heads and spin to try to make that consult a positive consultation. They're basically in a place where they're unreachable. And that's okay too. Unfortunately, there will be some ships that will not follow the beacon of the lighthouse, and they will crash into the reef or the rocks. And there's really nothing you can do as long as you know that you've done your best. And sometimes you can't make that difference, and that's okay. You have to know that that's okay. You can't save everyone. How do you manage the manipulative patient? Well, you do that because the manipulative patient tries to play you for whether it's pain meds or whether it's for a certain treatment they want. You need to just hold your ground, and not be reactive, right? So the key is not to play into their game. And how do you manage a threatening patient? How do you do that? So what you do with that is so a threatening patient is not somebody who's dangerous, a code gray kind of patient. I mean, hey, if you don't treat me the way I want or when I want, I'm going to go somewhere else. And, basically you just remain supportive. Hey, I understand your concerns. I understand your need and desire to move forward at a pace that's very rapid, but unfortunately, there's information I still need. I still need to do some testing. I still have to send you to another doctor. This is not going to happen as quick as you think. You have to be extremely, extremely upfront about expectations, what you have control over, and what you don't have control over, and how long things take. So sadly, things take a lot longer than they used to in the past. We have insurance authorizations that we have to deal with. We have to deal with waiting for patients to go see other doctors, where in the old days you would call a doctor friend and they would see the patient the same day or the next day. And now we're waiting a week or so, or maybe longer, for them to see these other doctors. So again, you just remain supportive, and you just have to, again, you can acknowledge what it is that they want, but you have to be very, very, very upfront and honest about what you can provide. Because if people, if practitioners and patients have different expectations, then everyone is going to get burned. It's just going to be a terrible situation. And lastly, how do you manage the angry patient? So as long as your environment is safe, you don't want to get tricked into a confrontation, because angry patients actually want you to confront them. That's actually what they're after. They are pushing you and pushing you and pushing you to try to get a reaction out of you. But you need to set these boundaries. I call them loving boundaries, but they're also strict and reasonable boundaries. And you have to make sure that you do that. Because when you do all these things with the patients that are not amenable to what you're trying to achieve, they will respect you. You may not get exactly what you want, but you will get the respect. And, by God, be better than I was as a young doctor. I never used to pick up on the red flags and the body language, but these are all important clues on how your consultation is going, whether or not you are guiding that patient who's in the storm, that ship. If you're pulling them or directing them away from the rocks and the reef, to the calm waters of the harbor, you have to make sure you're kind of negotiating those treacherous waters between the storm and the calm, and that's important. So the consult is our opportunity, Angel, to start a survivor's journey in the right direction. So what I say is, it is our duty to inspire confidence and trust, and just knowing that they have a medical team that actually cares and that will be with them always, that will be available and accessible to them, is the formula to be that safe harbor, to save them, from those treacherous waters of fear and despair, and to lead them to the calm waters, as I said, of resolve and determination. Angel, your thoughts?
I find the whole episode's interesting. It's funny, as you're giving the description, I have this picture of this boat, and everything was put like a still photo for me. So I'm looking forward to doing like a thumbnail for this episode. But as we close out today's episode, my thoughts are, we need to take a moment, to reflect. Just as a safe harbor shelters a ship in a storm, may we be that place of trust, compassion, and hope for those navigating life's rough waters, to put better perspective. Whether they're through a kind word, a listening ear, or even helping hand, we each have the power to guide someone toward a calmer seas. So I think that really, by thinking of it that way, it puts us into a better understanding as to, we need to be in a position to understand every single person's ability to be in a better environment, because I think that's really what is the key factor. So I'm hoping that each and every one of us will have that peace and strength to have your anchor.
Exactly. And, as we've always, been trying to focus our podcast to follow a certain directive, what is our goal for our podcast? And that's to, establish support for our survivors, give them information to sort of, scream out our four, foundational pillars of our organization, but also to help the practitioner, to help the physicians and whatnot, provide better care for our survivors. And on the surface, this seems more for the provider, this particular podcast. However, I want to end the podcast by saying this really is also for our survivors. So the bottom line is, this podcast should tell you or speak to you as to what you should expect during your first meeting with your doctors and your care team. You shouldn't go in there with no expectations, and you should not go in there just thankful that a doctor, was kind enough to spend the time to see you. That's exactly what we're trying to, preach against at the Croc Podcast. You do have, what I feel is the expectation of going into that consultation to be calm, to be directed, to be assisted, to get to a very safe and loving place, a place of confidence, a place of trust, and a place where, as I said, where you have the determination and resolve to beat your cancer. And that's what our job is, and that's what your expectation is. And any consultation that you have that doesn't meet that standard requires you to then change your team. And this is what the Croc Podcast does, everybody, is to try to let you know what those benchmarks are and what you're deserving of, what you guys are deserving of. And you guys as survivor thrivers who have, basically been given this terrible diagnosis of a disease that has, so much nefarious and such a terrible reputation, the least we can do is help direct you into those calm waters. So we'll end this podcast with our Croc blessing, and that is on behalf of Angel and the entire board of directors, wishing you all a long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. May God bless you. May God be with you, and peace.
Hey, Croc Nation, if today's message inspired you, please subscribe, download, and share this episode with your friends or someone who you believe needs it. Visit us at crocvip.com to connect, learn, and join the fight. Let's spread hope, one story at a time. Until next time, remember, we are not just a podcast, we are a movement.